woman experiences the oneness of all existence during astonishing NDE. My near-death experience NDE dates back to when I was about 7 years old, and it involved a drowning incident. We were at a small swimming area in the countryside of Ohio, catering mainly to residents in the Appalachian Mountains near the West Virginia border. My mother had grown up in this area, so we were familiar with the swimming hole, which was essentially a large man-made pond. A section of the pond had been cordoned off, and in the center of this area was a platform you could swim to, jump from and swim back to shore. As a 7-year-old, I had my routine. I could dog paddle and would jump from leg to leg until the water got too deep, then doggy paddle to the platform, run and jump back toward the shore. This system had always worked for me. There was a lifeguard on duty, and about 5 or 6 families were there, picnicking and swimming. On this particular day, I noticed a girl my age jumping off the deeper side of the platform. My competitive spirit kicked in, and I decided that if she could do it, so could I. After a few jumps from my usual side, I ran and jumped off the side she was using. What I didn't realize was that this side was significantly deeper, and unlike her, I couldn't swim well. I jumped, sank, and tried to push myself back up, but it was much harder than I expected. I barely managed to get my mouth above water to breathe, but instead of air, I inhaled water. I sank again, pushed myself up, and repeated this cycle, but panic set in. I couldn't scream and breathe at the same time, so my attempts to call for help were futile. I began to spend more time underwater, taking in a lot of water into my lungs. Realizing I was drowning, I raised my arm out of the water and waved, hoping someone would notice. The water was about 2.5 feet over my head, so only my wrist and part of my arm were visible. I tried this a few times, still attempting to push myself up for air, and recognized that getting a breath was more crucial than screaming. Eventually, my body started feeling very warm, and even at that young age, I understood that I was losing oxygen and beginning to die. I reached a point where I stopped panicking and began to surrender, easing into the process of letting go. Underwater, I could see the feet and hands of kids doggy paddling around me and fragments of sand floating in the water, caught in a beautiful wave-like motion. The water had a golden brown hue, and I surrendered to the beauty of the moment. Time felt suspended, and I focused on the sand, which looked like beautiful diamonds in the sunlight. I felt like I was in my own dimension, unseen by others. Despite being underwater, I could see my mother scanning the surface, her panic palpable. Telepathically, I communicated with another realm, expressing that my mother wouldn't understand my departure. I decided to stay, feeling a pull towards the other side but choosing to support my mother emotionally. As I made this decision, a woman approached me. She wore a white bathing suit with long white hair in a braid. She reached for me, and suddenly I was pulled out of the water, feeling the temperature change on my skin. I could still see my mother's frantic movements as she ran towards me, her energy palpable. She grabbed me from the woman's arms and brought me back to our blanket. I didn't need resuscitation, but catching my breath in the woman's arms was painful. It was incredibly dense and painful to take that breath of air into my lungs. Now fully back in my body, my mother started asking what happened. I explained that I tried to run off the other side of the deck, like another girl did. My mum decided it was safe to leave, understandably not wanting to stay any longer. She approached the lifeguard, questioning his absence during the incident. He had been preoccupied counting his tips and hadn't noticed anything. My mum then asked me to point out the woman who saved me, but I couldn't find her among the other families. No one approached us to check if I was okay, which seemed odd to us. My mum asked each family if they knew the woman I described, but no one had seen or heard anything. We found this very strange. I've always felt that a guide or guardian intervened when I decided to stay. In that near-death experience, I learned about oneness and universal connection. At such a young age, I couldn't fully grasp the lesson, but it began to make sense later in life. About 30 years later, similar experiences started happening to me. I became highly sensitive to others' emotions and energy, later learning that I was clairsentient. This gift, acquired from my NDE, allowed me to sense others' emotions deeply, sometimes mistaking them for my own. It took time to integrate this knowledge. In my early 40s, this NDE experience resurfaced, anchoring me to its lessons and gifts. Living unconsciously before, I had an awakening, recognizing the significance of that experience in shaping my understanding of life. I was at the border crossing between Vancouver, British Columbia, and the United States. The line was long, taking a couple of hours to cross. I took out a book, reading the Gene Keys next to me. A car blared aggressive, angry music. I caught myself judging them, but then had a realization these people were like me. As I observed them, I noticed they were calm and quiet, a contrast to their loud music. I realized they were my brothers and sisters. This epiphany, reminiscent of my NDE at age 6 or 7, flooded me with emotions. As the car moved forward, I noticed the background young Asian and black kids playing football nearby, smiling and happy. I felt a connection to them, as if I had been them before. I smiled with love and curiosity, feeling their emotions as if they were my own. Time seemed to slow down, much like during my NDE. I watched the plants and trees swaying in slow motion, illuminated by the sun. I saw another Middle Eastern family, sensing their pride and love. Here's the text, proofread and made easier to read. I was enamored by the Middle Eastern family, feeling their pride and love for their children. I realized we were all fragments of the same source, experiencing different lives but fundamentally connected. Filled with a profound love, similar to my drowning experience, I lost track of time. Everything seemed illuminated and beautiful. I felt connected to everything around me, the trees, plants, and grass blowing in the wind. I realized the illusion of separation and the beauty of our interconnectedness. There was no loneliness, only a sense of profound connection. I started to see energy flowing between each person, the bushes, trees, and plants, creating a beautiful labyrinth of light. It was an indescribably beautiful experience, filled with love and emotion. As I had this epiphany of oneness, I recalled the lessons from my drowning experience, and everything started to make sense. It felt intentional, like part of a larger plan. My vibration changed, and as I returned to myself, I realized I was soaked with tears of love. This experience was deeply connected to my drowning, the initial realization of oneness. I recognized that I would have many more experiences like this throughout my life, where the boundaries between myself and world dissolved.